I never expected that a landlord asking for a simple favor would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. There was no orchestra swell or dramatic zoom. It was just an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun slants through the blinds and illuminates the dust motes dancing in the air, and a knock on my door rearranged the entire landscape of my future. Let me take you back. My name is Miles. At the time, I was 26, and my world had shrunk to the size of my one-bedroom apartment. I worked from home as a freelance copywriter, a job that suited my quiet, introverted nature perfectly. My days were a predictable and soothing rhythm of waking, brewing coffee, sitting at my desk, and letting words fill the silence. I wasn't unhappy, not exactly, but there was a low, constant hum of loneliness beneath the surface of my contentment. It was the feeling of being a ship in a bottle, safe, self-contained, but ultimately static. The apartment building was old, a 3-story brick structure with good bones and a few charming quirks, like the way the radiator in the living room hissed and gurgled like a sleeping dragon. I'd lived there for 3 years. The previous landlord, Mr. Henderson, was an elderly man who communicated mostly through gruff, single-word notes taped to the lobby door. He was a fixture, as much a part of the building as the creaky floorboards. Then one day, a neatly typed letter appeared in our mailboxes, announcing his retirement and the transfer of ownership. The new landlord was his grandson, Julian. And just like that, the quiet, predictable atmosphere of the building began to change. I saw him for the first time on a Saturday morning. I was looking out my window, coffee cup warming my hands, and I saw him down below, wrestling a lawnmower out of a shed. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt. His dark hair was a little messy, catching the morning light. He moved with a kind of easy, unself-conscious competence that I found myself immediately and inconveniently drawn to. Over the next few weeks, Julian became a regular presence. I'd see him fixing a leaky gutter on the roof, his silhouette stark against the blue sky. I'd hear his friendly laugh echoing in the hallway as he chatted with my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, from 2B. He had a smile that seemed to start in his eyes, warm and genuine. He was everything his grandfather wasn't, young, energetic, and engaged. And in my head, he was also completely, undeniably straight. It was an assumption I made instantly, a defense mechanism honed over years of misplaced crushes. He had a certain kind of confidence, a casual masculinity that, in my experience, didn't leave much room for ambiguity. So, I filed my attraction away in a mental folder labeled "Do Not Touch." He was my landlord. He was unattainable. It was cleaner that way. Our interactions were brief, limited to polite nods in the hallway or a quick hello if we passed on the street. I was just another tenant, another door with a number on it. And I was fine with that. Or at least, I told myself I was. It was safer to remain an observer, to appreciate him from the quiet distance of my second-floor window. It was easier than risking the sting of reality. Then came that Tuesday afternoon. I was deep in thought, trying to find a dozen different ways to describe the crispness of a potato chip for a client, when a firm, clear knock sounded on my door. It wasn't the frantic rap of a delivery person or the timid tap of a neighbor. It was solid, confident. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. My heart did a stupid little flip-flop. I took a breath, smoothed down my t-shirt, and opened the door. There he was, Julian. He was even more striking up close. He had a fleck of what looked like white paint on his cheek, and his eyes were a warm, hazel brown. He held up a single, shiny, newly cut key. "Hey, Miles, right?" he asked, and the sound of my own name from his lips felt surprisingly significant. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah. Hi, Julian." He offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "Sorry to bother you. I'm in the middle of a massive project, updating all the building's emergency spare keys. My grandfather's system was, let's just say, chaotic." He gestured with the key. "I just got this one cut for your unit. I need to make sure it actually works, that it turns the locks smoothly without sticking. Would you mind if I just tried it for a second? It'll only take a moment." It was such a simple, logical request. A landlord needing to test a key. There was nothing unusual about it. It was professional, practical. But as I stood there, looking at him, it felt like something more. It felt like a crack appearing in the wall I'd built between my world and his. It was a disruption to the routine, an invitation, however small, to step out of my bottle. "Oh, yeah, of course," I managed to say, stepping back to give him room. "No problem at all." He stepped up to the door, his presence suddenly filling the small space of my entryway. I was acutely aware of the scent of sawdust and fresh air that clung to him. He slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, clean click. He turned it back, then tested the deadbolt. Another smooth click. The whole process took less than 10 seconds. "Perfect," he said, pulling the key out and smiling at me. "One down, 15 to go." He should have left then. The task was done. But he didn't. He lingered, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe, his posture relaxed. His eyes drifted past me into my apartment. "Looks nice in here," he commented. "You've got more light than I expected." "Afternoon sun," I replied, my voice steadier now. "It's the best part of this unit." His gaze settled on a large, framed print of a forest scene I had hanging on the living room wall. "That's a great piece. Where'd you get it?" "Oh, I actually took that photo," I said, a little surprised at my own willingness to share. "Upstate New York, a few years ago." His eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. "You're kidding. You're a photographer." I laughed, a small, self-deprecating sound. "Hardly. Just a hobby. I mostly write. Words are my main thing." "Still," he said, his eyes meeting mine again. "That's really cool. You've got a good eye." The compliment was simple, but it landed somewhere deep inside me, warm and unexpected. We stood there for another moment, the silence comfortable, not awkward. It was the longest conversation we'd ever had, and it was about nothing and everything all at once. He finally pushed off the doorframe, a hint of reluctance in the movement. "Well," he started, "I should let you get back to your words." He paused, and for a second, I thought he was going to say something else. The air felt charged with unspoken potential. Then he gave me that small smile again. "Thanks for the help, Miles. It's nice to actually talk to the people who live here, you know? Instead of just being the guy who fixes the plumbing." And with that, he turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing softly until they were gone. I closed the door slowly, my hand resting on the lock that his key had just turned. The apartment felt different. Quieter, but in a new way. It was the quiet of a held breath, of anticipation. I replayed his words over and over. "It's nice to actually talk to you," the way he'd said it, the way he'd looked at me. It felt personal. It was probably nothing. Just a friendly guy being a friendly landlord. But a stubborn little flicker of hope had been lit, and I didn't have the first clue what to do with it. That one small, mundane interaction had planted a seed of possibility in the carefully tended, solitary garden of my life. As he spoke about the key project, a subtle shift happened in him. The confident landlord persona softened for a moment. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed tired and a little stressed. "My grandfather had a system for everything, but it was all in his head," he admitted with a wry chuckle. "I'm spending half my time just trying to map out what he did for 30 years without writing any of it down. It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest." It was the first crack I'd seen in his confident exterior. He wasn't just the capable guy with the tools and the easy smile. He was a grandson trying to fill enormous shoes, someone feeling the weight of a legacy he hadn't built himself. This flicker of vulnerability made him seem more real, more human. It narrowed the distance I had imagined between us, making him feel less like an archetype and more like a person who felt overwhelmed, just like I sometimes did. That shared moment, that tiny confession of his, did more to pique my interest than his good looks ever could. It suggested a depth I hadn't anticipated, a story beneath the surface. When he left, the silence he left behind wasn't empty. It was filled with questions. I spent the rest of the afternoon completely unable to focus on potato chips, my mind instead replaying the conversation, dissecting every word, every glance, searching for meaning that might not have been there. It was a dangerous game, but one I couldn't seem to stop playing. A few weeks passed, and our interactions fell back into a familiar, albeit slightly warmer, pattern. A shared smile in the lobby, a longer than necessary chat by the mailboxes about the weather. The hope that had flickered to life after the key incident had dimmed to a low ember, a pleasant warmth I kept shielded from the winds of my own doubt. I had convinced myself it was just neighborly friendliness. It was easier that way. Then, late on a rainy Wednesday night, the universe decided to intervene. I was washing my dinner dishes when I heard a strange sputtering sound from under the sink, followed by the unmistakable drip, drip, drip of a serious leak. I yanked open the cabinet doors to find a steady stream of water pooling on the floor. My heart sank. A real, bona fide apartment emergency. And there was only one person to call. I found his number on the contact sheet he'd given us and hesitated for only a moment before dialing. He answered on the second ring, his voice slightly thick with sleep. Julian speaking. Hey, Julian, it's Miles from 2D. I am so sorry to call you this late, but my kitchen sink just exploded, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic and embarrassment. There was no annoyance in his voice, only immediate concern. Don't worry about it. Are you okay? Is it a big leak? It's pretty steady, I said, trying to stuff a towel against the offending pipe. I've turned off the water under the sink, but it's still dripping from the pipe itself. Okay, stay put. I'll be right there, he said, and the line went dead. Less than 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Julian, looking rumpled and sleepy, wearing sweatpants and a faded college sweatshirt. He had a heavy-duty toolbox in one hand. All right, he said, striding past me toward the kitchen. Let's see the damage. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos in my tiny kitchen. Julian lay on his back under the sink, the narrow beam of his headlamp cutting through the darkness of the cabinet. I was on my knees beside him, mopping up the spreading puddle with every towel I owned, handing him wrenches and pliers as he called for them. We were so close, closer than we'd ever been. His shoulder was inches from my knee. I could smell the faint scent of his soap, see the tension in his jaw as he worked on a stubborn fitting. The small space buzzed with a strange, frantic intimacy. It wasn't romantic, it was a crisis. And yet, I was intensely aware of his every movement, every muttered curse under his breath. At one point, a final burst of trapped water gushed out, soaking the front of his sweatshirt and splashing his face. He sat up abruptly, bumping his head on the underside of the sink with a dull thud. Ah, damn it, he grumbled, rubbing the back of his head and wiping a wet hand through his hair in frustration. Seeing him there, looking so defeated and damp, a wave of something, gratitude, empathy, something else, washed over me. Here, I said softly, grabbing a clean, dry dish towel from the counter and holding it out to him. He looked up at me, his work-focused expression softening as he took it. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. It was nothing, a completely accidental touch, but it sent a jolt straight through me. The air in the room shifted. The sound of the rain against the window pane seemed to get louder, filling the sudden silence between us. He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, before turning to dry his face. Finally, with a triumphant grunt, he tightened the last fitting. The dripping stopped. He slid out from under the sink, groaning as he got to his feet. He was tired, smeared with grime, and soaked, but he was smiling. All fixed, he announced. Thank you, I said, my voice filled with genuine relief. Seriously, you're a lifesaver. I was having visions of my floor caving in. He laughed. Part of the job. He looked around at the messy kitchen, the pile of wet towels. Sorry about the mess. Are you kidding? You saved me from a flood, I said. The least I can do is offer you a beer? Or a coffee? Anything. The words were out of my mouth before I could second-guess them. It felt bold, a step beyond my usual cautiousness. He looked at me, then at his damp clothes, and seemed to hesitate. For a second, I was sure he'd say no. But then he nodded. A beer sounds amazing, actually. Thank you. A few minutes later, we were sitting at my small kitchen table, a couple of beers between us. The landlord-tenant dynamic had completely evaporated, replaced by something quieter, more personal. The rain continued to patter against the glass, creating a cozy, insulated world for just the two of us. He started talking, really talking. He told me about his grandfather, about the immense pressure he felt to live up to his legacy. He talked about his own dreams, how he'd studied architecture in college but had to put it on hold when his grandfather's health declined. I love this building, he said, looking around my apartment. It has great lines. But I always imagined I'd be designing them, not just fixing their pipes. I found myself opening up, too. I told him about the isolation of working from home, about my silly photography hobby, about how I sometimes felt like I was watching the world from behind a pane of glass. He listened intently, his hazel eyes fixed on me, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a very long time. The conversation flowed easily, an ebb and flow of shared vulnerabilities and quiet confessions. The space between us felt electric, humming with unspoken things. I was so wrapped up in the moment that I barely noticed how late it had gotten. Finally, Julian glanced at the clock on my microwave and sighed. "Wow, it's almost 1. I should let you get some sleep." He stood up, and I followed him to the door, a sense of disappointment settling in my stomach. I didn't want the night to end. He paused in the doorway, just as he had weeks before. But this time was different. The air was thicker, heavier. He wasn't leaning casually against the frame. He was standing right in front of me, his body turned toward mine. "I should go," he said again, but his voice was quiet, and he made no move to leave. His eyes searched my face, as if looking for permission. The world seemed to slow down, narrowing to the few inches of space that separated us. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet apartment. Then, he closed the small gap between us. He raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was feather-light but sent a shockwave through my entire system. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. His lips met mine. It wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was tentative, soft, and full of questions. It was a whisper of a kiss that asked, "Is this okay?" And with a surge of courage that felt both foreign and completely natural, I leaned into it, answering him without a single word. My hand came up to rest on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his damp sweatshirt. The kiss deepened for just a moment, a brief, breathtaking confirmation, before he pulled back slowly. He looked at me, his eyes wide, a storm of emotions swirling in their hazel depths. He didn't say anything. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, turned, and walked out into the hallway, leaving me standing in my doorway, my lips still tingling, my entire world tilted on its axis. The days that followed the kiss were excruciating. The warm, buzzing connection we'd shared in my kitchen was replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The air in the building, which had started to feel like home, now felt charged and tense. It was like walking on a high wire, every step fraught with the possibility of falling. I saw him the next afternoon near the mailboxes. Our eyes met for a split second. A flash of something, panic? Regret? Crossed his face before he gave me a curt, tight-lipped nod and quickly looked away, busying himself with a stack of junk mail. The easy friendliness, the lingering glances, the shared smiles, they were all gone. In their place was a chasm of awkwardness. My mind, of course, went into overdrive. I became the sole detective in the case of the midnight kiss, and the evidence was maddeningly inconclusive. I replayed the entire night, from the moment the pipe burst to the moment he walked away. I analyzed every word, every touch, every look. The tentative nature of the kiss, which had felt so gentle and respectful at the time, now seemed like a sign of his uncertainty, his hesitation. Was it a mistake? A moment of weakness brought on by the late hour, the rain, and the easy intimacy of solving a crisis together? Maybe he was just grateful, and his gratitude had gotten tangled up with other things. Or worse, maybe he was drunker than I thought on that one beer. My brain conjured 1,000 scenarios, each one more painful than the last. He regretted it. He was straight, and he'd had a momentary lapse in judgment. He was embarrassed. He was disgusted with himself, or with me. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest had withered into a knot of anxiety. Every creak in the hallway made my heart leap, thinking it might be him coming to talk, to explain. And every time it wasn't, the knot in my stomach tightened. I started timing my entrances and exits, trying to avoid him. The building, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a minefield. I vacillated wildly between clinging to the memory of his gentle touch and wanting to erase the whole night from existence. One moment, I would remember the look in his eyes right before he leaned in, a look of such raw vulnerability, and I'd be filled with a defiant certainty that it had meant something. The next, the memory of his abrupt departure and the subsequent silence would crash over me, leaving me convinced I had imagined it all, that I had read the signs completely wrong. It was the not knowing that was the worst part. The silence was a vacuum, and my fear and insecurity rushed in to fill it. I started to resent him for it. If it was a mistake, just tell me. If it meant nothing, let me down easy. Anything was better than this agonizing limbo. The silence wasn't just an absence of words. It felt like a judgment. It was a confirmation of my deepest fear, that I was not someone worth taking a risk for. After 5 days of this silent torture, I had nearly resigned myself to the fact that I had to let it go. I would have to find a way to go back to being strangers in the hallway, to rebuild the comfortable distance that had existed before. I would pack the memory of the kiss away, lock it in a box, and bury it deep. It was the only way to protect myself. I was sitting at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, trying to summon the will to work, when I heard it. A knock on the door. It was quiet this time, hesitant, not the confident rap from before. My breath caught in my throat. I knew it was him. I walked to the door, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach twisted. It was Julian. He was just standing there, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders slumped slightly. He looked nervous. He looked like he'd been having as terrible a week as I had. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I opened the door. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes at first. He stared at a spot on the floor just past my feet. "Hey," he said, his voice low. Can I come in for a minute?" I stepped back and gestured for him to enter, my mind a complete blank. I had no idea what to say, what to expect. He walked into the living room and stood awkwardly in the middle of the rug, as if he didn't know what to do with himself. "Look, Miles," he started, finally lifting his head to look at me. His eyes were filled with an exhaustion that mirrored my own. "About the other night, and this whole week. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I've been so weird. I've been an idiot." I just nodded, waiting for him to continue, my insides coiled with tension. This was it. The explanation. It was a mistake speech I had been dreading. He took a breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into deep water. "The kiss? It wasn't a mistake," he said, the words coming out in a quiet rush. "And I wasn't drunk. And it wasn't about the leak, or the late hour, or any of that. It was about you." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," he continued, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "Longer than you think." He paused, then made a decision. "That day I came to test the key, the first time we really talked." I nodded again, unable to speak. "The key was fine," he confessed, a wry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. "I mean, yes, I was making new spares, but I could have tested it myself in about 5 seconds. I didn't need your help. I wanted an excuse. I wanted a reason to knock on your door, a reason to talk to you for more than 10 seconds in the hallway. I'd see you coming and going, or through your window when I was working outside, and I couldn't get you out of my head. But I had no idea if you were, he gestured vaguely between us, or if you were interested. I was terrified of crossing a line, of making you uncomfortable in your own home." A wave of understanding and relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. The silence, the awkwardness, it wasn't rejection. It was fear. The same fear that had kept me locked in my own quiet observations for months. "So when I kissed you," he went on, his voice earnest, "it was completely impulsive, but it was 100% real. And then I immediately panicked. I walked out of here and thought, what have I done? I just forced myself on him. I've ruined everything. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared I'd misread everything and made you feel awful. So I stayed away, which was the stupidest thing I could have possibly done." The knot of anxiety in my chest finally, blessedly, unraveled. A small, shaky laugh escaped me. "You have no idea," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've spent the last 5 days convincing myself of every worst-case scenario imaginable." A look of profound relief washed over his face. "You have, Julian," I said, taking a step closer to him. "I've been into you since the day you showed up with that lawnmower. I just assumed you were straight." It was his turn to laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "Straight? God, no. Just private. And apparently, a coward." All the tension, all the fear and misunderstanding that had filled the space between us for a week evaporated in that shared moment of laughter. He closed the remaining distance between us, and this time, there was no hesitation. He framed my face with his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks gently. "I am so sorry I put you through that," he whispered, his eyes searching mine. "It's okay," I whispered back. We were both scared. And then he kissed me again. There was no tentativeness this time. It was a kiss of certainty, of relief, of promises kept and futures beginning. It was confident and mutual and breathtakingly real. When we finally broke apart, we just stood there, foreheads resting together, breathing each other in. The silence that fell wasn't empty or awkward. It was full. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a new beginning. The weeks that followed the confession felt like waking up from a long, hazy dream. The grayscale routine of my life was suddenly flooded with color. The building was no longer a place to hide, but the place where our story started. We moved from the charged intimacy of my apartment to the world outside. We went on actual dates, the kind I'd only ever read about or seen in movies. Our first date was at a small, noisy Italian restaurant downtown. We talked for hours, picking up where we'd left off at my kitchen table, but this time without the backdrop of a plumbing disaster. I learned about his childhood, his complicated relationship with his father, his secret love for bad sci-fi movies. He learned about my family, my anxieties about my writing career, and my encyclopedic knowledge of 80s pop music. It felt easy, natural, like we were simply remembering something we'd already known. The small moments became the foundation of our new reality. He started bringing me coffee in the mornings, leaving a thermos outside my door before he started his work for the day. I'd find him on my doorstep with a knowing smile. Thought you might need this. I started helping him with some of the administrative work for the building, organizing his grandfather's chaotic files into neat spreadsheets. We found a rhythm, a comfortable dance of give and take, of shared lives beginning to intertwine. My quiet apartment, once a symbol of my solitude, became our haven. It was where we'd cook dinner together, navigate the small space of my kitchen in a comfortable ballet, and end up talking on the sofa late into the night. The loneliness that had been a constant, low hum in my life was gone, replaced by the warm, steady presence of him. About 2 months after that first, real kiss, we were cleaning up after dinner. I was washing, and he was drying. It was a comfortable, domestic silence, punctuated by the clinking of plates. He finished drying the last dish, put it away, and then turned to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out, his expression soft and a little bit shy. It was the key, the single, shiny spare key from that first day. He took my hand, turned it over, and placed the key in my palm. Then he reached for my own keychain, which was sitting on the counter. He carefully threaded the spare key onto the ring, next to my own apartment key and the key to my parents' house. It looked perfectly in place, as if it had always been meant to be there. I think this belongs here now, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. Not as a spare for the landlord, but just as yours. My throat felt thick. It was such a small gesture, but it was monumental. It was the key that had started everything, the excuse he'd used to cross the threshold into my life. Now, he was giving it to me, not as a tool of his trade, but as a symbol of trust, of belonging. It was him telling me that this place, his life, was mine to access freely. It was a promise. I looked down at the key, then back up at him, a wide smile spreading across my face. Yeah, I said, my voice full of an emotion I couldn't quite name. I think it does. Life is funny, isn't it? You can spend so much time building walls to keep yourself safe, arranging your world into a neat, predictable pattern. You tell yourself you're content in the quiet, that you're better off alone because it's less complicated, less painful. You learn to live with the low hum of loneliness, accepting it as a permanent fixture, like the sound of a distant highway. And then one day, there's a knock on the door. It's just a simple request, a mundane interruption to an ordinary day. But it's an opportunity. It's a hand reaching out, asking you to unlock the door you've kept bolted for so long. The bravest thing you can ever do, I think, is to turn that lock. You have to be willing to let the world in, with all its messiness and uncertainty. Because sometimes, a simple spare key doesn't just open a door. It unlocks a life you never even knew you were waiting for.